Good evening and welcome to the November installment of the Crossroads of Ideas series. My name is Laura Heisler and I'm the Director of Programming for the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, the Director of Outreach for the Mortgage Institute for Research, and a partner with the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. And these are the three organizations who collaborate to bring you this series. The whole goal of the Crossroads of Ideas series is to engage in meaningful discussion and dialogue with the community around issues that matter to all of us in our lives that also happen to be the subject of research at UW-Madison. Before we turn to this evening's events, I want to mention a couple of details, including the session that we're going to have next month to round out the calendar year. Next slide, please. I want to invite you to mark your calendars for December 7th from 5 to 6 p.m., where we will take stock of the current moment we're living through and ask how healthy is our democracy. We're going to do a status check with a number of leading researchers who are also national figures on the subjects of democracy and influences on the health of democracy and healthy populations. So please do join us on December 7th from 5 to 6 p.m. Now, just a few notes about how this evening's session is going to go. A hallmark of all Crossroads of Ideas is fielding audience questions. We want to invite you to submit your questions using the Q&A function, which you can find by hovering over the bottom of your screen. There'll be a full half hour dedicated to your questions beginning at 8 o'clock, but we invite you to submit them at any time as they occur to you, and some of the panelists may choose to respond by typing throughout the course of the evening. With that, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Ginger Ann, who will read the land acknowledgement. Ginger, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. We're going to start off this evening with the land acknowledgement. The University of Wisconsin-Madison occupies Ho-Chunk land, a place their nation has called Dejop since time immemorial. In an 1832 treaty, the Ho-Chunk were forced to cede this territory. Decades of ethnic cleansing followed when both the federal and state government repeatedly but unsuccessfully sought to forcibly remove the Ho-Chunk from Wisconsin. This history of colonization informs our shared future of collaboration and innovation. Today, UW-Madison respects the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with the 11 other First Nations of Wisconsin. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truths every day. This month is Native American Heritage Month, a month dedicated to celebrating the rich and diverse culture, history, and contributions of Native people. You can learn more at the link that we have on the slide here, and we'll also include that in the chat. And with that, I'd like to pass the Zoom mic to Derek Smith, WID's Development Director, who's been integral to shaping the event that we have tonight.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Derek Smith, the Director of Development at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. On your screen is our timeline, panelist introductions and overview. At 7:20, we will have the panelist discussion led by Vanessa Mcdowell. At 8 o'clock, we'll have a quick stand up and stretch. And then at 8:01, we will do questions and answers from the audience to the panelists. And then at 8:30, we will close on time. On behalf of WID and our director, Joe Handelsman, we welcome you as well to this Crossroads event. Our mission and vision at the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery is to discover and inspire through interdisciplinary research conducted in a dynamic, collaborative community. Our diverse talent and unconventional partnerships bring new ways to research problems and enhance public engagement. Diversity and inclusion are critical to our mission as we work to overcome the perniciousness effects of racism, unconscious bias, and structural inequity that prevent us from realizing our potential. That mission is integrated into the fiber of who and what we are at WID. Yet, as with most things in our world today, that mission has been challenged by COVID-19, racial strife, and an economic downturn. Our initiatives in anti-racism are leading internal and campus-wide discussions on race and anti-racism, increasing diversity in recruiting and hiring top-tiered scientists of color, and engaging with the Madison community to commission murals depicting diversity in science to inspire future WID scientists. Now with that, what I'd like to do is to talk to you a little bit about our statement. In looking at our anti-racist initiatives, we came up with these 3 items. Not only a statement, but what actions can we do and the principles that are guiding those actions. Next slide, please. The Wisconsin Institute for Discovery is committed to eradicating, back two, please. The Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. The Wisconsin Institute for Discovery is committed to eradicating racism in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and in academia broadly. As WID is part of those systems, we have a responsibility to take action, make change, educate ourselves, confront racism, and build a more anti-racist organization. Anti-racist actions. WID is leading a series of events and resources to work towards systemic change that upholds a Jedi principle. This event is part of that series. Jedi principles are guiding our actions are anti-racism, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. What does that mean? What can our community do? What can our research groups do on campus? And more importantly, what can we all do as individuals? With that, I'd like to now introduce Julia Nepper, who is going to introduce our moderator and our panelist. Julia Nepper was raised in rural North Carolina and began attending community college at the age of 11. She graduated from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington with degrees in biology and chemistry. And after a post-baccalaureate at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, came to UW-Madison for graduate school in Dr. Douglas Weevil's lab, where she studied bacterial biofilm formation. After graduating with her PhD in biophysics in 2017, she worked as a science writer for Promega Corporation. Since the beginning of 2020, she has been a postdoc in Dr. Joe Handelsman's lab, using her experience with biofilms to investigate the role of secondary metabolites in model soil communities. And with that, I hand it over to Julia.
Thank you, Derek, for that wonderful introduction. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our incredibly talented and just amazing panel. Like, I literally cannot tell you all of their accolades because it would take a little bit too long, but I'm going to give you some highlights. So first, I'd like to introduce Linda S. Greene. She is the FGU Bascom Professor of Law at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her teaching and academic scholarship are concentrated in the three areas of constitutional law, civil procedure, legislation, civil rights, and sports law. She received her BA in health education from California State University, Long Beach, her JD from the University of California, Berkeley, and a certificate in public international law from the Hague Academy of International Law. Before her teaching career, Professor Greene was an attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund in New York City and a deputy city attorney in Los Angeles. She was the first African-American woman to teach at Temple University Law School in 1978, and next joined the faculty at the University of Oregon Law School in 1981. In 1984, Harvard Law School invited her to become the first African-American woman to teach at the law school. Thereafter, she was a visiting professor at Georgetown University Law Center and served as a counsel to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. Her sports interests stem from her middle distance track and field experience during college and law school. She has been a media...
Excuse the interruption. We have been in this session together for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. An amount of time that it took on some symbolic meaning when George Floyd was held down and asphyxiated by a police officer on May 25th. Please join me as we take a moment to disrupt this panel and reflect on the urgency of dismantling systemic racism in our society. During this moment of reflection, I will speak a few names of those who have been murdered as a consequence of racist ideologies and unchecked violence against the Black community. Sandra Bland, Michael Brown, Philando Castile, George Floyd, Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Elijah McClain, Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor, Emmett Till. Closer to home, we recognize Tony Robinson, killed in 2015 in Madison, Jacob Blake, paralyzed this summer in Kenosha, and so many others affected by this same violence. We pledge to keep the injustices suffered by these individuals at the forefront of our work, to hold ourselves accountable, and to be actively anti-racist in our service to the movement. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerard, for that, for reminding us why we are here today and why we are interested in hearing from this panel in being more anti-racist in our daily lives. So, Dr. Linda Greene, her sports interests stem from her middle distance track and field experience during college and law school. She has been a media, political, and legal analyst for 25 years for a variety of media, including the New York Times, where she has written opinion pieces since 1992. Dr. Ruben L. Anthony Jr. has been the president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Madison since March of 2015. Over the past 30 years, Ruben has been a senior manager in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. He is a subject matter expert in developing job placement strategies and in minority business development. The majority of his career has been as a manager with the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, where he started as a first-line supervisor and eventually became the deputy secretary and the chief operations officer from 2003 to 2010, where he managed an annual budget of $3.25 billion. In 2017, he was awarded the Golden Champion Award by the National Association of Minority Contractors, Wisconsin chapter, for leadership in minority business development in the Wisconsin construction industry. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings is Professor Emerita and former Kellner Family Distinguished Professor in Urban Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She is the current president of the National Academy of Education. Ladson-Billings' research examines the pedagogical practices of teachers who are successful with African American students. She also investigates critical race theory applications to education. Ladson-Billings is the author of a number of critically acclaimed books and more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. Her work has won numerous scholarly awards, including the H.I. Romness Faculty Fellowship, Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship, and the Palmer O. Johnson's Outstanding Research Award. In 2002, she was awarded an honorary doctorate from Umeå University, Umeå, Sweden. Pardon me. Ladson-Billings has an active community life that includes serving on several community boards such as the Urban League of Greater Madison, the Madison Children's Museum, the United Way of Dane County, and the Susan G. Komen for the Cure of Madison. She is a 50-year-plus member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc. As an active member of the Mount Zion Baptist Church, Madison, Wisconsin, she is the second woman named to the 109-year-old church's Board of Deacons. Amber Smart is a second-year college student hailing from Kenosha, Wisconsin, studying human resources and economics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She is also working on campus as the Strategic Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Administration Project Assistant Intern on behalf of the Office of the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion. She is actively serving on several multicultural student organizations. Being the child of an ER nurse and former police officer and Army veteran, she believes it is her duty to serve her community, which has been instilled in her from a very young age. And finally, but not least, Gabrielle Tielman-Fenelus graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a bachelor's in English and certificates in criminal justice and African American studies. She is a third-year law student at the University of Wisconsin Law School, where she currently serves as the president of the Black Law Students Association and as the student liaison for the Civil Rights and Liberties section of the Wisconsin State Bar. Gabrielle is a Washington, D.C. native and has extensive internship experience with various local, state, and federal government agencies. After graduation, she hopes to do her part to create a more equitable criminal justice system with a particular emphasis on aiding communities of color and low-income individuals. And of course, I have to introduce our moderator, Vanessa Mcdowell, who was initially hired in 2014 as the Director of Support Services for the YWCA, then promoted to Chief Programs Officer, later promoted to Interim CEO, and finally CEO. Vanessa is deeply committed to offering programs and services that support women in social justice, help families, and strengthen communities. She has a passion for serving others by leveraging voices that have been silenced, as well as empowering others to live out their purpose. She works from an empowerment model, which aligns with the mission of the YWCA-Madison, which is to eliminate racism and empower women. Prior to joining the YWCA, Vanessa worked for the UW-Madison's Wisconsin Equity and Inclusion Laboratory and was the executive assistant to the pastor for Mount Zion Baptist Church. Vanessa is born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. She attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison and earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology. She has made a commitment to stay and work in the Madison community because of her dedication to this community. In 2016, Brava magazine selected Vanessa as one of the 22 women to watch. Vanessa was also honored as one of Madison's 40 under 40 by In Business magazine in 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, and all of our non-binary friends, please welcome Vanessa Mcdowell.
Good evening, everyone. Very excited to join you all this evening and be a part of this illustrious panel that we have tonight. I just kind of want to start off by talking a little bit about the work that we do at YWCA-Madison, in which our mission, as it was stated, is to eliminate racism and empower women and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. And so in doing that, we do it sort of in three buckets: job training and transportation, race and gender equity work, and housing and shelter. So I'm actually currently in our downtown building, which we're most known for, on the square, where we house over 100 women and children, as well as men with children as well. And so very excited to participate, as this is part of our everyday work that we do at YWCA-Madison. So very interested in talking about anti-racism, education, and action from Kenosha to UW-Madison. So this will be a very thought-provoking and hopefully action-oriented group that we have here. So very excited to begin this panel with everyone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by asking sort of a general question to everyone, and ask you all to unmute when you want to speak, and I'll kind of call you all in order to speak on this first question here. The question is, what does anti-racism mean to you? I'm going to start with Amber.
Hi. To me, anti-racism means paying attention to how racism affects every part of your life, making sure to try to hit it at every level, even like small microaggressions to being denied jobs. I think looking at how it impacts us as a people at every single level, I think is very important to being anti-racist. And I also think as a person of color, actively getting involved and connecting with other people of color and bringing our struggles together and really combining our efforts and making sure I'm shining a light on everybody else and not just myself is also very important. And also educating myself on any pitfalls that I have. Being a person of color doesn't automatically negate me being able to have any biased thoughts about other people. So being able to go out and educate myself and actively research other people and what they go through.
Great, thanks, Amber. Gabrielle, how about you?
Yeah, I would just like to echo pretty much everything Amber said. I think to me, anti-racism means understanding that there are racial imbalances that exist in pretty much every setting that we're in, and using our privilege and our voice to directly address those imbalances, redistribute power, and share that power equitably. It also means that the responsibility isn't just on people of color to consistently address these issues. We all need to take ownership of our own actions, kind of understand our own privileges, and actively create spaces for people of color in every setting that we're in.
Great. Professor Greene, you want to chime in?
Yeah, what a privilege to follow my former student, who shall always be my student. In the 21st century, we had a system of racism that maintained power of whites over all sectors of the economy and politics with an explicit system of white privilege, white only in certain places. And if you moved out of your designated place, either private violence or public violence would be the sanction. So what does it mean in the 21st century? I want to quote a guy named Bonilla Silva. He's a sociologist. He said, now we have racism without racists. What did he mean by that? 21st century racism is a system that normalizes the racial status quo. We still have the same racial hierarchies. We still have the same income differences. We still have the same exclusion from positions of power. But what undergirds our 21st century racism is an ideology of color blindness. That is the way we justify it. So now just what would anti-racism mean? So racism is how we explain, defend, and ultimately justify the contemporary racial order, such as immunity doctrines that permit police officers to shoot Black people dead in the street without any recourse. That's a colorblind system of immunities that works that way. So what is anti-racism? Anti-racism is a commitment and actions to end the contemporary racial order.
Dr. Anthony, you want to add to that?
So to me, anti-racism is when we have the law equally applied. Anti-racism is when Jim Crow raises his ugly head in Kenosha or anywhere else in this country. We call it what it is. We say that this is not fake news. Unequal justice, whether it happens in Kenosha or whether it happens in Mississippi, is unequal justice. And so anti-racism is when we stand up for truth and say wrong is wrong, racism is racism, whether it's being carried out by police or whether it's being carried out by citizens, that we all stand for truth and just say that that's not right and that is racism. And so I'll stop there.
Powerful stuff. All right, Dr. Billings, bring it home.
Thank you, Vanessa. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And it was interesting that I heard Linda quote my friend Eduardo Bonilla Silva, who graduated from the same department that Vanessa graduated from. He is a sociologist, PhD from the University of Wisconsin, and the first person of color to be both Black and Latinx president of the American Sociological Association. So I just want to give him that shout out because he's done really interesting work. And I think his son is in the band or something crazy like that. But anti-racist, I'm probably going to define it by saying what it isn't. It isn't saying I'm not racist. And I think that's the everyday response we get from people. Oh, I'm not racist. To say you're not racist is not to say you are anti-racist, because anti-racist is an action. It is an activity, as you have heard. So one of the things that I often challenge my neighbors and community members, most of whom are white, about is about their circle of friends. I mean, I've gone to a funeral in my neighborhood of a man who was 86 years old, and my husband and I are the only Black people in this funeral. I've turned to my husband and said, you can live 86 years and only know 2 Black people? That tells me something about how you are living your life. You know, and they may not like me, but trust me, when I die, some white people are going to show up. It's because I've been in their circles. And so we're talking about your active everyday life. Who are your friends? What are you reading? What activities have you joined so that you can work actively against racism? It is not enough just to say you're not racist. To me, that's a cop-out because you're really not participating.
Awesome. Okay. I feel like we're getting the fires burning a little bit. So we've started kind of with a base here and trying to sort of define what we mean when we're talking about anti-racism. Oftentimes in conjunction sort of with this conversation, a lot of times with the work that we do at YWCA, we're talking a lot about anti-Blackness as well. And that concept and how it can show up in communities of color as well, including the Black community. And sort of the spectrum that happens. I appreciate Professor Greene talking about the history of where this all came from, right? And there was always sort of this concept of inferiority. Right, like Laura may need to mute there. Give her a second there. Laura, are you there?
What happened?
I think you need to mute there.
What?
Can
What?
you mute? All right, there we go. All right, so there's always sort of, this conversation I think that needs to go deeper when we're talking about sort of this anti-racism concept and really digging into, the historical context of this, but also how this stuff plays out today. And a lot of times we don't want to have these conversations because either, we've had a Black president, so people think we have arrived, or we have gotten to this place where, there's not, I don't think it's racism, right? Or I'm not racist, as you talked about, Dr. Billings. So really just kind of doing a deep dive, and I'm hoping in this conversation, we continue to get deeper and deeper to kind of peel off the layers a little bit to this very heavy kind of topic. Something that kind of came up from this that I kind of want to start and tackle is a lot of times when we're talking about anti-racism, the police conversation comes up. And I'm going to give this one to Gabrielle, sort of in your background of education and being, a law student. What do you think is the most impactful reform for police training and or departments to reduce racial biases?
Yeah, so I think that there isn't necessarily, one solution to this issue. I think it's really a nuanced question. So I want to, I guess, first preface what I'm going to say by saying that I'm not an expert. I don't know, all of the facts. I don't have all of the information, but I really do think that it depends on kind of the needs of the constituency. So it really is department by department based. Because if you can imagine, a police department in New York City is going to have very different needs than a police department in, say, like Idaho or something. And so I think what the first step would be is for police chiefs to really understand their constituency and understands the needs that face those particular individuals. And then from there, you can actually kind of address real issues. And so I think in general, though, I think the first step begins before you even hire a police force. I think that the real work starts kind of in our homes and in our households, and it starts with what we teach our children. And then moving on to the police department, I think that police departments have a responsibility to hire people that are willing to receive implicit bias training and to actually implement that training into their everyday practices. And so I think that there needs to be more formal kind of audits at the beginning or at the front end when these agencies are hiring people, because if someone isn't willing to learn, if someone isn't willing to engage with people that are different from themselves, then no real change is going to happen. And so to actually answer your question, I think that the best training is by having conversations and building real relationships. And so if I personally was a police chief, I would have, first, I would obviously have implicit bias training. I quite honestly am not, like I said, not an expert. And so I don't know necessarily what that training would look like, but I think that it needs to be an ongoing lesson, and it needs to be something that is implemented in every single stage of the general training process for police officers. And so I think after that training kind of happens, I would require my police force to go through maybe 6 months of intense community-based kind of, not policing, community-based interactions where police officers will go into community without their guns, without the desire to necessarily police the individuals that they're interacting with, and actually get to know those people and have real meaningful conversations. Because I think a lot of times police officers are just so far removed from the communities that they're interacting with that they inherently think
everyone that I'm coming into contact with is criminal, because that's what they're looking for. And so I think initially just building those relationships and kind of understanding, you know, that there are people behind those incarcerations or those arrests, and they have families, they have people relying on them. And so understanding it from a more like, I guess, human standpoint instead of just a tough on crime one would be kind of the first step.
So Vanessa, can I jump in
Yeah, I was
here?
gonna say, jump in if you have.
And I'm not an expert on policing, but I used to be a history teacher. So I'm always interested in what's the history of something. And I would venture to say that most Americans do not know the history of policing in this state. In fact, most police officers don't know the history of policing. We have policing in the North in the beginning of the nation to continue to push the indigenous people out, because these settlers are coming in, they want to set up their shops, they want to develop cities in Boston and Philadelphia and New York. And so we don't want these indigenous people around. They need to stay away. In the South, the primary reason for a police force was to round up slaves. Now think about that. That's your foundation. That's what you were organized for. Has any police department had that conversation with new recruits? Like, look, the reason we got started was to do X. How do we have a kind of public relations push to show that we are not still in that place? Because I think that's the way many communities continue to experience them. You know, the titles might be different. We may not be named a slave, but that your sense of what your job is to protect an overclass from what you see as an underclass. And those are actually words from a man by the name of Anthony Bouza, who wrote a book some time ago called The Police Mystique. Anthony Bouza was the chief of police of the Minneapolis Police Department and went on to become the police chief of police in New York City. And he said, look, that's our job, is to keep the overclass protected from the underclass. That's very different from a rhetoric of we're here to protect and serve, or us going in schools telling kids, you know, officer friendly. They're having a different experience because literally the history of why these this institution was put in place was to protect and serve a particular group of people while exploiting another group.
Yeah,
Vanessa, can I add briefly? Yeah, so I think the key to reforming the police is using cameras in a different way. I think if we can use cameras in the NFL to reform quarterbacks and bad running backs from the Philadelphia Eagles and different teams like that, you know, I'm just saying we can use cameras to reform police. I think that, you know, right now we talk about, you know, the dashboard cameras and body cams, but using those cameras during the first part of a police career. We won't give a person a driver's license until they're field tested. And I think we need to do the same thing with police. During that first stage of their career, we need to have cameras on all the time. And we need to have them look like they do with a quarterback on Monday morning to say, well, you passed this way, or you should have thrown it that way. And this will give us the ability to weed out those cops that, you know, are not meant to be cops and improve those cops that are making bad decisions in the field. And I think the technology is available and we ought to use it.
Amber, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My dad, he is a police officer. He was a police officer. He's been one since I was about 12. He was a police officer first in Montgomery, Alabama, and then Kenosha, Wisconsin. And I just wanted to say that I think you really know that an institution is like sick when the people who participate in it are starting to come up with these like negative effects. Like, I love my dad, he's super loving, super caring, but I definitely did see changes in him when he decided to become a police officer. He was just quicker to anger. He seemed more reclusive, negative things like that. And he said that when he was like first becoming a cop, I have really young parents, my dad's only 32. But when he was first becoming a cop, he said that he thinks that one of the biggest mistakes is that you give the requirements to become a cop. You have these guys that are like 18, 19, 20 years old, and then you give them all this power. You give them the opportunity. You don't teach them how to use something. They don't know how it feels to get shot. They don't know how it feels to live in these neighborhoods. You're policing people and you don't know what it feels like to be them. You don't know the decisions that you would make if you were under their same pressures. And so he thinks that one of their biggest flaws is, one, giving young people too much power because they haven't had enough experiences, and two, taking people from different communities and just putting them in another community to police them. And it's like, you can't police people accurately that you don't know. You don't know, like Black people, we talk with our hands. I'm not being aggressive. I'm not coming at you. That's just how we talk. But you wouldn't know that because you're not actively within our community, but you're only here to police it. And so I think that if you want to talk about police reform, you need to look at the requirements that it takes to be a police officer. And then where are you putting these people in the community? They should learn the community before they just try to go in there and police somebody that they don't know.
Can I add?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Oh, Ms. Smart, that was extremely profound and very personal. We have two models of reform. We have, let's get rid of the bad apples, looking at these individuals who engage in this activity as, lone rangers off doing their own thing, as opposed to looking at them, as Dr. Billings suggested, as a part of a system. These police departments have cultures. Their cultures are not only created by their leaders, but also created by their histories, and they are passed down and reproduced over time. I think when we've heard a lot about defund the police. I understand the sentiment, but what we have to figure out is, how do you make a break in a culture of violence and disrespect? How do you make that break? And it's not, yes, sure, they're bad apples, but as Ms. Smart is explaining, that there's stress, there's post-traumatic stress, there's depression, there's a big burden that our police officers are shouldering when, as you said, they're thrust into situations about which they have no understanding. So we have to think about this on a cultural level, an institutional level. How do you create a different culture, rather than focus on the people who are acting out on the basis of what they understand they will be rewarded for? What they will be rewarded for. We have a whole system that is designed to reward, and unless we get the hot footage, the George Floyd, or the Daniel Prude, and we can go on with Jacob Blake. Unless we get the hot footage, there's no settlement. So right now, the price that the cities pay, between $1 million, not counting attorney's fees, to the highest settlement so far has been Breonna Taylor, $12 million. And we're all paying that price, but we're not necessarily engaging in any kind of transformation of the culture of policing. And I think it's, yes, there are bad people, but I think it is a mistake to place the blame on the so-called bad apples. That's unfair. They are being led and rewarded in a particular type of culture. We have to change that culture if we want to change policing in the 21st century.
Awesome. I was just saying, like, I know this was like a one person question, but I knew it was going to be a hot topic because, there's a lot of thought that goes behind this, right? And I love how you put the two models out there that people are wrestling with is, the sort of bad apple concept and sort of this systematic racism that's going on in this institution. And, I would push a little further on what Deacon Anthony, I know it's Deacon Anthony, Dr. Anthony said in regards to, the camera piece. And I want to kind of explore this real quick because what we know about America and what we know is that things can be videotaped and still nothing done, right? And people still not being held accountable. And so a couple of times I've heard Jacob Blake's name mentioned, and Amber, you being from Kenosha, I kind of maybe want to start with you in regards to the question of being a native of Kenosha. What did that attempted murder, is what I'm gonna call it, attempted murder on Jacob Blake's life, what did it mean to you?
I don't know. I feel like I was just so desensitized that when I saw the headline, I honestly was just like, okay, there's another one. Like it didn't really have like this significant, impact on me, because if I let every time something like that happened in my city impact me, I wouldn't even be in the right mental state to be here, because it happens so often. It's just that Kenosha isn't like a popular, city. So I feel like our department gets away with a lot of stuff because like nobody's ever really looking at us. And it just so happened, that his story got so big. But I think it wasn't the incident that like really did something for me. It was like the aftermath. Like I lost a lot of friends. I think that was like the hardest part. I'm only 20. I'm not, but all the relationships I've had have lasted most of my entire life. And some of my best friends were like saying these crazy things, and I was just like, wow, like it's sometimes like I've associated with you people for so long. Like, how could I have not known? And it's like you don't really know people until something like this happens, and it forces you to ask these questions. And so I guess now, like what the incident represents for me is it makes me more cautious of who I'm allowing myself to be close to, because like with the shooting and all the riots and everything, I really saw who was really going to be there for me and my community and who just wasn't. And it was a really sad time for everybody involved. And the whole city was just in turmoil, and I had people texting me all the time. And then you had like his face plastered everywhere. And it was just really stressful. And I guess I felt for the first time what these other kids in these big cities feel when this stuff happens all the time. And I was just like, I feel like I don't know, in a way it felt almost unacceptable. Like I get you want to share the video, you want to spread awareness, but like I just feel like if he was any other like color, like would you think that this was okay to just share somebody's dad almost dying? Like to me, it felt very performative when people would post stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, I feel like nothing positive happened, nothing good came out of it. Everything is the same. So I guess it just really it showed me how far my city has to go and how we've really gone nowhere.
Could I just follow up? And I'm going to bring it back to Dr. Anthony. What you were saying, you're talking about after every football game, Monday morning, the coaches are watching film. They're watching film, and they're watching film in order to instruct their coaches and how to conduct the next week of practice before the game. And I think I'm just throwing the ball back to you, to Ruben, Dean Ruben. I'm throwing the ball back to you to really explain that idea, because you're talking about it from a training and an educational point of view. And I just wanted to bring that back into the conversation and let you take that ball again.
Yeah, so I'm not talking about necessarily using it for evidence, because it should be used for evidence. That's a given. I'm talking about using the film to help fully develop, those cops. That those new cops that come on the scene, they should have body cameras, and all of their behaviors and all of their incidents that they have with Black people and people in general should be looked at and studied, just like a coach would look at the film on a Monday morning of a quarterback or running back. And then to give them some constructive feedback about, how well they did, how bad they did, and then to use that information to decide whether they'll make a good police officer or not. And I think, we have evolved as a society that we ought to use those tools. And so I want to answer that, but I also want to take the privilege to answer the question that Vanessa put out there. How do you feel, when you saw this thing happen in Kenosha? I thought that it was separate but equal on full display, because we saw the disparate treatment of two situations. The African-American Jacob Blake, was almost, fleeing away and not, being threatened at all, and he got shot in the back. But at the same time, you can have a white dude, kill two people, strap on that, ammunition and that rifle and then walk right past, a militarized situation and leave town, without, having a glove put on them. And so for me, that's separate but equal on full display. And the thing that bothers me the most is like, how could people be silent about this? Our eyes are not playing no tricks on us. This was separate but unequal, So, but anyway, but the videos can help, train the cops and weed out cops. Thank you.
I guess I would probably also say that, in this society, one of the last taboos is, quote, racism. So you can call people all kinds of stuff, but when you call them racist, there's always a kind of visceral reaction. If you've ever driven down the street and seen those, I don't know what you call them, those display balloons, those tall balloons that are trying to sell you something, and the wind blows them and they're moving. That's how people respond when you get down to, so I've had conversations about the current president and racism. They'll say all kinds of stuff. Oh, he's sexist. Oh, he's this. But the minute you push to racism, you start to get the, well, I'm not really sure. Well, that somehow that's the bridge that we don't want to cross. That we don't want to, as Iyanla would say, call a thing a thing. Racism is a thing and we see it, and we do need to call it out. We need to be able to clearly say that kind of behavior, that action, that statement, though they represent racism.
Absolutely. I think to that point, Professor Greene, I'm going to ask you, as we're talking about this concept of like systematic racism, what is the history of the laws that have enabled systematic racism in our state and country?
Yes, of course, we've heard about Plessy versus Ferguson, even in this conversation, even though we had 3 constitutional amendments added to our constitutional system after the Civil War. The Supreme Court nullified those amendments and Congress's power to act to ensure equality by the beginning of the 20th century. And then the Supreme Court did not pick that ball up again until the middle of the 20th century with Brown versus Board, and then dragged its feet in terms of effective remedies and eventually interpreted the 14th Amendment to require proof that the government intended to engage in racism. And as I was saying before, we've had systemic racism since 1619. We're talking 400 years of it. We've only had a few years where we've made some tentative steps. Now, when the Supreme Court had a chance to make a difference in the 70s, it decided that if you're going to prove that any illegal action occurred, you have to go into the mind of the government and prove that those government actors intended to make a decision on racial grounds. They've made it almost impossible to make a change. Now that they call that the perpetrator approach to racism, looks at racism as the product of a set of conscious decisions that individuals or people make. But what we all are emphasizing here is that we have had systemic racism. By that is, yes, there are racists, but we've had a system that enabled a subordination of Blacks, Native people. Now we say Latinx. We have had a system that subordinated those people by law, and it was in place officially, our apartheid, until the middle of the 20th century. And now we have confined the circumstances in which the courts can act, and we've also attached a really high risk to any voluntary systems of desegregation, whether that's in the K-12 area or whether that's in higher education. We have made it extremely risky. So not only have we narrowed the definition of what is illegal under the Constitution, we've also attached the highest amount of scrutiny and risk to any policy that seeks to open opportunities up on a voluntary basis. And so we have locked in place the 400 years, the consequences of 400 years of systemic racism. We have locked it in place in our legal system. I'm thrilled that people are starting to talk about reparations, because the only kind of approach that could make a difference to make up for 400 years, imagine, do we need 400 years of absolutely aggressive action to bring our country to where it ought to be? Maybe it can never be brought back from the brink of 400 years of racism, but the current legal system makes it very difficult to do. And of course, our current Supreme Court will not be a friend or a partner in that project.
Yeah. It's interesting, when you think about how all of these things are connected and how, I think for the first time, I would say in this election, which shamefully so, I've seen the real importance of where the power is, right? That we sometimes think, we're automatically looking at the presidential race, right? So we're always like, that's where the power is, but really the power is in that Congress, in figuring out how do we get folks in and out that support our needs. I think we're seeing that even with our, current situation in our state with Governor Evers and his hands being tied in a lot of ways to even being able to mandate that we wear masks. Like it is getting to the point where it is so sort of ridiculous in what we have to maneuver. You know what I'm saying?
But it's a great example because the people who, of course, are sick or dying disproportionately are Native people, are Native Americans, our First Peoples, our Latinx people, our African American people, the poor are suffering. And I think when you view that COVID pandemic through the lens of from the bottom, looking at it from the perspective of the people who are going to be hurt, it makes sense that without power, those people are, we have a system that is considering them to be expendable, I think that, and we know that, as ironic as it is, that there's an election in Georgia 2 days after January 1st, where the possibility that President Biden will be able to do something systemic for all the lives that have been affected turns on 2 Senate seats in Georgia. Yeah. 2 Senate seats in Georgia in a runoff. But I think it's great that we are coming to grips with what power. This is about power. The court, the confirmation of justices is about power. The president, power. But we can take that analysis down, and I'm sure you will ask us when we start talking about what is it that we have to do to make a difference. We have to interrogate power in every institution we find ourselves and ask the question whether the historical allocation of power and the subordination of minorities in this country is reflected in my organization, in my community, in my institution, in my nonprofit, in my bank, in my real estate company, and my development company. Does my company look like a place where that historical subordination of racial minorities is in place and alive and well? And what it means to be an anti-racist is to lead on the dismantling of that system of racial privilege in an institution.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as we're talking about sort of this concept of institution, right? I feel like we've stuck a lot on sort of the police side of things and talking about laws and state, but I want to switch quickly before we go into questions from the audience, which you all are, I see, chiming in, so continue to ask your questions. I want to talk about education, right? And I want to shift the conversation a little bit to another demographic, which is children. And I guess my first question would be to Dr. Anthony, in terms of what types of disparities or racism do you feel our children face right now?
Yeah, I think right now with the COVID-19 virus, it's an education disaster for poor and Black and Latino and just poor kids. The latchkey kid, at home, they have nobody to help them with the technology. We made a big deal about, the digital divide and saying they need devices. Well, yeah, they need devices, but they ain't got nobody home to teach them. So there's an instructional deficit, there at home. And I'm worried about, what's going to happen with our children. The disparities that Black kids were facing prior to COVID-19, they're going to be worse. Those kids that were on the borderline, going to fall in. So this whole thing about the disparities becoming wider and deeper. Wider in the sense that those folks that were on the fringes, the kids that were on the fringes are now going to fall into that disparity cycle. The kids that were already under disparity are going to go deeper and fail. And so, we have to do something about that, because I don't know if we can catch these young people back up. And so we really need to start devoting a lot of energy to talk about, how we can help these kids. Most of these kids, their parents are essential workers, and so they don't have nobody, at home. And so, we need to be trying to get them back into school. And I heard this morning, I was watching MSNBC, and they said the first thing we need to do when we get those vaccines is to get teachers vaccinated and get kids back into schools, because they need it. Right now, just like the economy is shut down, the education system is shut down, and Black and brown kids are going to be worse off than they were before the COVID-19. And they were in bad shape, prior to COVID-19 with the disparities. And I'll stop there because I know.
I just have to say one thing. We had a racial pandemic already, and now we have the COVID pandemic, and that, if you look at that in an intersectional framework, the burden is exponentially fallen on the least of these, our children.
Absolutely. Deacon Billings, with your work that you are known for and do your innovative research, a lot of times you're talking about not what's wrong with a child, or a child, Black child specifically in the classroom, but what is right. So how does this influence your view of the current situation, the current events that are going on?
So I've been writing about this since about March, and I have a view that's very different from most people. Professor Greene mentioned that there's both the racial pandemic and the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are two other pandemics. There is an economic pandemic. This is about to crash. There are people who are getting ready to be evicted from apartments. There are houses that are about to be foreclosed on. And the economic markets in the US have an inordinate impact on markets around the world. So that's the third. And then the fourth one is the climate catastrophe. We feel like we're insulated from it because we're in the Midwest, but the truth of the matter is, my grandchildren all live in California. They could not go outside. I have lots of friends in the Gulf Coast region. We've gone through the alphabet. Now we're on to the Greek alphabet. More storms, more intense storms. But, and this is a big but, I've been really influenced by an Indian novelist by the name of Arundhati Roy, who suggests to us that the pandemic is a portal, that pandemics do what they always do. They divide the old world from the new. So when I talk to education people and they keep talking to me about getting back to normal, I'm not at all interested in going back to normal at all, because normal was when my kids were failing. Normal was when they were being put out of school, suspended, expelled. Normal was when they never got a chance for advanced placement. Normal was where they never were in honors classes or in the orchestra. So normal is the place where our problems are. This is a moment, if we will seize it. And again, I'll reference Roy. She says, if we can drag all that stuff we had into this new world, or we can go into this new world, as she said, as Roy says, with little luggage. We can go into it lightly, ready to embrace a new world and to fight for it. So when people talk to me about learning loss, well, if you know anything about human development, as long as human beings are alive, they're learning. Then they may not be learning the academic curriculum, but there was no way for this nation to be brought to attention except for young people. They was learning something. And they might not have been learning what you got in that stale, dead book, but they are learning things. And it's that kind of energy and civic engagement that I think gives us the opportunity to fully construct education in a totally different way. You're already seeing some cracks. Places like Stanford and Harvard are saying they're not even going to use the SAT. So these tests that you think you have to have, some of the most elite institutions say we don't need those tests. So I think it's an opportunity if we will seize it.
Beautiful.
And I'll give, and my cautionary tale is, when New Orleans happened in 2005, everybody wanted to get back to normal. Well, everybody knew that New Orleans was a terrible school system. Why would you want to get back to that? And there were a group of neoliberals who said, you know what? This is an opportunity to do something different. So I'm not suggesting we want to do what they said do, but I think it's Rahm Emanuel who is paraphrasing Winston Churchill when he says, never let a good crisis go to waste. We in the midst of a real crisis, let's not waste it. Let's take, let's mobilize parents and community groups and to say to school systems, we don't want to go back to that stuff y'all had. That stuff was terrible. Let's do something different. So that's where my hope is residing right now, that we can seize this moment and do something totally different.
I love that. Seize this moment and do something totally different. That's a good note to end on. So we're going to end this phase of our conversation. Thank you all for rolling with me and answering these questions. We're going to take just a brief moment just to kind of stretch if you need to. And I am going to start collecting conversation points or questions from the audience here. What you'll see here is an opportunity for you all to have some reading resources. So Dr. Billings has been gracious enough to offer us some great reading here. So if you are looking for next steps, if you're looking for education, how do I learn more? Please look into these resources because they are great. I have read a couple of these already, so I know they're great. So please, 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 please take advantage of those. Okay, I think we are ready to jump back in. I know that chat has been blowing up, so I am going to see if I can manage all these questions that are coming in. I'm going to start with, someone asked the question, what are your thoughts on Black people continuing to try and fix systems that were created to keep them excluded and oppressed historically? Anybody?
Well, I think Dr. Billings really gave us a window into that we don't want to replicate what has been broken and has been ineffective. And we are in this creative moment where our young people, not solely, but our young people are demanding that we rethink, reconstruct our systems. And I think that is the opportunity of this moment.
Absolutely. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead.
I agree. I think some of the systems have to be broken down. When we look at the how policing is going on across the nation, even though each police organization has home rule and they do their own thing, they still get the same results. Black people get the low end of the stick. They are excessively beat with excessive use of force. They're excessively killed. We have to break that system down. We have to get rid of this blue code of silence and this blue fellowship, and we need to do something different. We need to rebuild our policing operations in the state and across the nation. We need statewide guidelines for use of force and other things. And I'm not saying take away all of the home rule, that they have, but as it relates to excessive use of force and deadly use of force, we need standard practices.
Yeah,
I would just argue that, Black people have a history of transforming stuff. So you might say the system is X, but look at what church was, and then Black people start having church. It don't look nothing. So it's an institution, but they made it their own. Jackie Robinson breaks the color line, and now baseball begins to look totally different. Football begins to look different. Music, I mean, everything that we end up putting our hands on, even if it turns out to be a part of a pretty staid institution. You know, Professor Greene is in the law, but what happened when her colleagues and Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and Delgado and Pat Williams, when they got together and started to do something with that same old stale law, they transform it. So I'm banking on Black people to do what they do. And that is that we go in and we have our own way of making it something different and transforming it.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone else has said. I would also say when you're kind of wanting to transform the system, what you have to do is, like, if you're out there protesting and things like that, you need to have actual tangible things that you're asking for, because no change is going to happen, you know, if you're just stomping your feet and giving a hissy fit. You need to have real tangible changes that you want. And I think in terms of policing, kind of going back to Dr. Anthony's point, I think one of the biggest changes that we can make as a society in terms of policing is getting rid of qualified immunity. It just grants police officers so much power, and it leaves very little room to hold them responsible for their actions. And so I think that that's one of the first steps. And I think, you know, a lot of times we try to do things from a bottom up kind of approach, but I think qualified immunity and Dr. Anthony was mentioning state and federal laws. So I think that that is kind of the approach that we need to take, because change is great on the lower level, but there are, I think, 18,000 police departments across our country. And so, you know, just because you change one, that doesn't mean that systemic change is going to happen. And so I really do think, going back to what we were talking about earlier, voting really matters. And not just for president, we need to be thinking about, you know, the individuals that we put in local office, because all of it matters.
Absolutely. So there's often this question from non-Black folks, and I'm going to assume, maybe it's a bad assumption, but I'm going to assume a good portion of our audience may not be Black. Their question is around, you know, for non-people, I'm going to say non-Black people because, you know, it's a Black thing. What are the actionable things that they can do to be better allies for us? Or with us, I should say.
I have an idea. I would start. I would say that they have to, so anti-racism, racism is continuing to defend, or allowing other people to defend without any challenge, the racialized distribution of power, of property and opportunity in our lives, or in your lives. You allow someone else to defend it. You see how it maintains racial hierarchies, and you sit on the sidelines. And so it's acknowledging explicitly the racialized distribution of power in your own life. That's one. A second, just understanding that this is not new. This is straight from the 17th century to the 21st century. It's an enduring feature of our American constitutionalism. So just to acknowledge that. And then it is racism to accept the status quo. And I don't mean in the sense of, oh, you're a racist, you're a racist. No, it's a system of racism. If you accept the status quo, you don't have to accept the status quo. And it is anti-racism. So this is for allies and all of us. Anti-racism means confronting the status quo wherever it lives and flourishes, in our schools, in our businesses, in our political institutions, in our streets, in our neighborhoods, in your families, in your communities. You just have to start to stand up. You don't have to know all the answers or how you're going to get from A to Z, but it is to acknowledge that the systemic racial subordination that is an integral part of the structure of the United States government and constitutionalism lives in our society today. And you can make a difference by being willing to confront it. You don't necessarily have to call anyone a racist, and you don't necessarily have to beat up on yourself. But what you can say is, I'm a part of an institution where whites hold the power, the privilege, and the authority. That's not acceptable, and I'd like to change it. It might mean marching to the office of the person who is leading your organization and saying you would like to have an effort to make change in your organization, in your community, in your workplace, etc. And it's not going to be, it's going to be messy, it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be comfortable, but nothing great really happened in an atmosphere of complete comfort. That's just not the way change takes place.
I'm going to do a panelist no-no. Amber, how would life be better for you as a UW-Madison student? What does UW-Madison need to do? Talking about transforming institutions, right? What would they need to do to make you feel like, ooh, I'm so glad I'm here. I love being here. I'm gonna paint Bucky Badger black, whatever, what kinds of things would you like to experience as a college student on a campus that is overwhelmingly white? And if people want to know the statistics, we are the next to the bottom in terms of diversity in the Big Ten, which is 14 schools. There's only one school whiter than us, and that's Nebraska.
Not even Minnesota.
I would say the one thing is just don't lie. Like, your school isn't diverse. And so like the way that UW advertises their school was very misleading. And like, I just remember like all the little pamphlets that they had, and the groups that they would place us in when we were touring campus. And they would literally split us up like we didn't know. Like, there's only 4 Black people here, we're all in the same group. But it was to make us feel like the campus was more diverse than it really was. And clearly I go there, but to be honest, it kind of worked. Like, I felt like, okay. And their statistics were like, it just made it seem like the campus wasn't as white as it really was. And so when I got there, I was, I'm already going to be like shocked and everything, but it just made it worse. Like, you told me you had all these resources. You told me that you had, X, Y, and Z to help me get through it. And it just wasn't there. The support wasn't there. It was like fake just to get me in the door. And then when I got there, they just let me go. And I was just in this, sea of hundreds of thousands of kids by myself. And so I just wish like up front UW was just more honest about their statistics. Like, it's okay, I get it, you haven't, it's fine, but don't like lie or be deceiving to your incoming Black and brown students, because that's why they leave.
Well, I want to follow up, and I'm breaking the rules as well, but what should the university do to prepare our whites and other students to be prepared to lead and in a multicultural world? I mean, there's 5,000 kids in every class. So what do you think should be happening there?
I don't really think there's like one thing, and everybody's different. But I guess like one thing that would be really nice is if like, I don't know, they had some type of like seminar or something, because I know like when I first got to campus, we had this like, UW, like they sat us all down according to your residence hall, and you guys all talked about stuff, and like race and like gender and all those kind of identities weren't mentioned at all. So it's like from the jump, like white kids know that UW like doesn't really care about it that much. So I guess like, having some type of consequence or something and saying that to the white students when they come on campus, so that they know that this is something the university cares about, and they'll be less likely to act out, would be nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I can go. Yeah, so kind of going off of that. So as an undergrad, I think I issued like 3 sets of demands to the university, and now in law school, I've issued 2. And so I think my biggest issue that I see is just the fact that change doesn't happen unless we are issuing these huge call to actions, these huge sets of demands. And I think that the university needs to be more proactive, and kind of going off of Amber's point, it's just clear to everyone that they literally do not care. They don't value us, and they don't value, the Black people that exist in the Madison community. UW-Madison as an undergraduate institution is not accessible. And then the law school is even less accessible for people of color, especially Black students. And so I think that the first step that they need to do is kind of go further into these communities and figure out why it is that they need to provide resources and figure out why it is that these students aren't able to come to our universities, because the most of the students of color that I know, especially in undergrad, except for, the People Scholars, are individuals that came from out of state. And so then once they come to UW-Madison, once they graduate, no one wants to stay here because we didn't have great experiences here. We didn't feel included. We didn't feel like we belonged. And so then we leave after. And so it's just an ongoing cycle of, we have this issue, these conversations every single year, because they are not fixing the system, and they are not creating these inclusive spaces. And then just going back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, just like what white allies can do. I think a lot of times there are kind of 2 approaches or 2 things that happen. One, a white ally, they want to help, but they become crippled in kind of the process because they don't want to be seen as racist. Quite honestly, you kind of have to get over that fear, because literally every single day as a Black woman, I feel uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable in my law classes, when I'm the only Black student in the entire class. I feel uncomfortable walking around campus, and I can go an entire day without seeing another Black person. And so, I personally don't feel bad for you because you feel uncomfortable talking about race. That's something that you're going to have to kind of step outside of your comfort zone and get accustomed to doing if you want to practice anti-racism. The other kind of thing that I see white allies dealing with is being too eager, I guess. They're so eager, and they think that they know all of the right things to do. They think they have all the answers, but they don't even talk to the communities that they're trying to advocate for. And what they end up doing can be crippling to us. And so kind of going back to the very first question that I answered tonight, we need to be having conversations. You need to be reaching out to Black people. You need to be reaching out to other people of color and find out what it is that they actually need. And then you need to ask them how you can best serve them and their needs. Don't assume anything.
I love that. And I think, as you all are talking in terms of, it's making me remember my experience, at UW and my alma mater, and Lord have mercy. There were some things that I also went through that were difficult. I mean, I couldn't explain it, but what I will say is that what I experienced pushed me into my major, and pushed me into my purpose. And, I didn't know I had such a fire burning passion about fighting injustices until I went to UW-Madison. And it was a moment in which I was working, ironically, for the chancellor in the chancellor's office, and was discriminated against in the chancellor's office. That it was an opportunity for me to make my voice heard, and make something happen and change. Ironically, though, to your point, Gabrielle, it wasn't until I made a fuss and a ruckus did something change. And so I guess as people are listening, I hope that, UW is out here listening to this panel to know that we've been telling you what we need. We've been sharing and having these conversations. But as you can see, generation after generation, we're having the same experience, which is no change. So
I just want to say, I'm reminded of John Lewis's last speech, that more people need to get in good trouble to change this world.
Yeah.
And Vanessa, I don't want to hijack the conversation, but I definitely want to weigh in as well as an alumni of Madison. You know, after going through the University of Wisconsin, you feel broken. But I also went to a HBCU. After going to Jackson State University, I feel empowered. I feel like I could conquer the world. You know, I feel like I could be president of the United States. So I guess Kamala, after coming from Howard, felt like she could be president. I guess Dr. Billings, after coming from Morgan State, felt like she could be a Kellner family distinguished professor. You know, you feel empowered when you come from HBCUs. And so, you know, I respect the degree that I got from the University of Wisconsin, but I didn't have any support, you know, when I was on campus. I felt like I was isolated, and the same things that, you know, I experienced maybe almost 30 years ago, I hear the kids saying today that they feel isolated, that nobody sponsored them, nobody support them, and there's brain drain. When they leave with their degree, they leave in the state. That investment that the state, you know, has made in them, you know, getting their education here, it won't be used here in Wisconsin because they didn't feel like they were wanted on campus and they're going somewhere else to use it. So we have to do something about, we talk about disparities among young people, we got to do something about disparities on campus.
And it's fitting to have this conversation, obviously, as we are, you know, talking and on this particular WARF platform, that it's imperative at this point, as we were talking about earlier, that we are in the midst of a transformation and standing right inside of it right now. It's almost like being in the eye of a storm. Like, we are right in the middle of it, and you can go left or you can go right. But the idea is, hopefully, these conversations push us to go right and go in the right direction and move us out of this constant pattern of the same thing and the status quo and all of these things that we have been comfortable in, or some of us, I'll say, have been comfortable in, and has not produced anything. So when you're talking about what can you do as a non-Black person, we've named numerous things that you can do. One of the things that, you know, we always sort of see the shift that happens with this conversation around D&I and diversity, inclusion, and, you know, equity, and it changes from time to time. But there's something about belonging. There's something about having a sense of belonging in any space that you're in. And specifically UW-Madison, as we're talking here, why is it that we as Black people don't feel like we belong? We never have felt like we belong there. So there is a call to action, I think, that's coming out of this group to say, what are we going to do here in our sphere of influence to transform these different institutions that we've talked about today? What are we going to do differently that is going to be out of the box, something that we have never done before? Because we know that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different result. What are we doing that is going to be different and dynamic, and it might be uncomfortable, to get us to the point where transformation can really happen? So as we're thinking about these things, as we're talking about these things, I know you all have asked, you know, lots of questions in the chat that I know we can't get to, but there is this conversation about what is our responsibility? What is your responsibility in your role, in your whatever, in your life, in your personal life? What is your responsibility? There's a question that came across that said, Madison, we're talking about Madison, seems like a quintessential liberal community. I love this concept that we always talk about Madison being liberal. One aspect that I've observed is that many white people, including, or maybe especially those in leadership positions, come across as being quite self-satisfied with their relationship to racism. Do you agree? And if so, is that getting in the way of progress?
Well, I would not weigh in on whether they feel self-satisfied, but there's been some really great work that's taken place among the law schools, actually led by 5 of our Black female deans, who have urged our entire legal education community to make an anti-racist pledge. And they sorted out a few steps, which I won't go in detail, but I'll just list them off, that you create a space in your organization, in your family, or in your community, your business, your civic group, for anti-racist service and for anti-racist activism, something that endures, not the Black History Minute, as Eddie Murphy used to say, or the Latinx Minute. This is something to endure, and that you listen to people inside your organization who've experienced racism and learn about their experiences, that you reach out to experts in your particular sector, whether it's banking, education, insurance, whatever the area is, and find out how racism has been embedded in your own institutional practices. You make a written commitment at the top level to do something about it. Everybody learns, and you don't fob it off to, of course, the Blacks or the Latinx people in your community, and you audit your organization for its inequities systemically, and then you set about to correct it without apologizing for the way it is, but to make a commitment that it looks different a year from now, looks different, that the people who share power will be different, the people who make decisions will be different, the people who are on the way up to the top of your organization will be different, and you measure that. Just like you value what you measure, you value what you count. So those are just some things that are coming out of our own law school anti-racist activities. Leaders stepping up, holding themselves accountable, auditing their organization, targeting change, and making the commitment to change the upper levels of their organization so that they are inclusive, they get all the voices they need, and they end the inequity that exists.
I would just argue that Madison has to become a place that is willing to look at itself squarely in the mirror. I've been in some conversations with the school district and with school districts across the country. 15 years ago, the district got engaged in something called Courageous Conversations. It's all about race. Whole thing blew up because you cannot tell people in Madison that they're racist. They will not stand for it. And they literally ran them. And I know this gentleman. I knew him from Stanford and from the Bay Area. And I was in California that year that he was doing that work here. And he said, this is the worst place I've ever worked in my life. He said, these people almost broke me in two. Now, 15 years hence, I'm working with a district outside of Minneapolis. They have shrunk the academic disparities in some significant ways. When I asked, well, how were you guys able to do this? Well, you know, we work with Glenn Singleton and Courageous Conversations, and we still engage. So the very thing that we claim we want to do, if someone brings it to us, oh no, not that. I used to tell students all the time, I'd rather work with conservative people because at least I know exactly where they are, and we can have a intellectual conversation about why they see the world the way they see it. But my experience with a lot of the folks in the so-called liberal environments is that they already know, and there's nothing you can tell them.
Yeah. Vanessa, the young people that are out there, you know, marching with Black Lives Matter, doing more than talking, you know, are making a difference. You know, groups like the Every Foundation that's doing more than talking, that's putting their investment behind organizations like yours, organizations like mine, and others, they're making a difference. People like Joe Parisi, again, you know, who's sticking his neck out, you know, for our ventures and things like that, they're making a difference. Some people are just putting out platitudes and feeling good about putting out the platitudes and saying, here's what we're doing. That ain't nothing. The folks that are stepping into the work at the different levels are the ones that are making the difference.
That is a great way to close. Thank you all so much for your insight and just spending time with us tonight to share your hearts. And so I'm going to hand it over back to Derek Smith here.
Hey, what a conversation. Thank you very much for everybody being here. Two quick things that I heard that before we leave is everybody has a right for a call to action and make your voice heard. You know, we do these so that we can get everybody's attention. So what are you going to do with that attention? And I know that there's a lot more questions that were asked that we weren't able to answer. We're going to try to get the panelists to see if we can get them to answer some of those questions on the side and get them out to you in another format. And also this recording of this event is on www.discovery crossroads.wisc.edu/videos. We will be available within 24 hours. Again, thank you for attending this Crossroads series event by WARF and the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery. I want to thank the panelists, Vanessa Mcdowell, CEO of YWCA, as our moderator, great job. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, Emeritus Professor of Education, UW-Madison, thank you. Dr. Ruben Anthony, CEO and President, Urban League of Greater Madison. Linda Greene, Professor of Law, UW-Madison, and our great students, Gabrielle Thielmann, Chair, Black Law Students Association, UW-Madison, JD candidate, and Amber Smart, UW-Madison student, special program intern from Kenosha. We couldn't have had a better panel and great discussion, and thanks for everybody who did put forward a question. Before we leave in the next 30 seconds, I also want to thank our organizing and sponsoring for this event, that is Crossroads of Ideas, from WARF, the Discovery Building, the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery, and the Illuminating Discovery Hub. Remember the anti-racist resources that were brought up, our A-JEDI Working Group, the Morgan Institute for Research, and the Wisconsin Alumni Foundation. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank my great collaborators on this committee for this, Laura Heisler of WARF, Shauna Baranchek from WARF, Gerard Buckner from WARF, Sarah Miller from WID, Ginger Ann Contreras from WID, Amanda Hurley from WID, and Julia Nepper from WID. Again, thank you very much for participating and being on board. I can't thank the panel enough for your time and consideration for this. Let's go out, let's be the voice, let's be the reason of action for each other, and be safe and healthy. Thank you.